Hello and welcome to tonight's event, a local authors panel, storytelling across 3 genres. My name is Hannah Risley and I am a librarian with the Beatley Central Library here in Alexandria. Tonight I am joined by 3 local authors, Ginny Fite, Jeffrey James Higgins, and Solveig Eggerz. They will take turns answering questions about storytelling and genre. During tonight's event, please feel free to ask your own questions. At any point during this event, you may place your questions for our panelists in the chat box or the Q&A box, and I will include them as appropriate. Now I would like to take a moment to introduce tonight's panelists. Award-winning journalist and writer Ginny Fite is the author of 7 traditionally published novels, the most recent of which is a collaborative project titled Thoughts and Prayers. A graduate of Rutgers University and Johns Hopkins University, her 40-year career in communications included posts in newspapers and magazines, universities, politics, and a robotics R&D company. Nominated for a Pushcart Prize, shortlisted for the SFWP Prize, a finalist for the Bachwin Prize, her writing has appeared in numerous journals and magazines, such as McSweeney's, the Anthology of Appalachian Writers, the Delmarva Review, Santa Fe Writers Quarterly Project, and Frederick Magazine. Jeffrey James Higgins is a retired supervisory special agent who writes thrillers, short stories, creative nonfiction, and essays. He has wrestled a suicide bomber, fought the Taliban in combat, and chased terrorists across 5 continents. He is a #1 Amazon best-selling author and has won numerous literary awards, including the Pencraft Prize for Best Fiction Book of 2021. Solveig Eggerz is the author of 2 novels, Seal Woman, inspired by the Selkie legend, and Sigga of Reykjavik, based on the history of 20th century Iceland. A native of Iceland, she has lived in Alexandria since 1974, where she tells stories and teaches creative writing for Herd, a nonprofit dedicated to bringing art to underserved populations. Please join me in welcoming tonight's panelists. Hi, everyone.
Hello, great to be here.
Hi. So for our first question, I want our audience to get an opportunity to get to know you a little bit. So I'll call on you one at a time. And I just would like you to tell the audience how you got into writing and found your genre. How did you get started and what was your journey into your current genre? So I'm going to go in order of how we introduced you. So Ginny, you're first on the mic, and Jeffrey, you're on deck.
Okay, so I don't think I was ever not writing. I was probably writing my first novel when I was 5. And now that I've seen my grandson do this, I know it's really possible. I didn't misremember. I think that I started seriously writing somewhere around 40 years old. Like just, I was going to do it. I would crack that novel. I would get into it. Of course, the first 2 were terrible and just as well that nobody offered to publish them. But about 10 years ago, I just woke up one morning and thought, well, I think I can write a mystery. I had been Googling in the middle of the night, how do you write a mystery? So I know that my brain was thinking about this earlier. But driving to do my various chores one day, a voice started telling me a story. I know this like out-of-body schizophrenia kind of thing, but honest to God, it felt like there was somebody in the passenger seat telling me this story. I zipped through my chores, raced home, started typing like a mad woman. And when my husband said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Be quiet. This is coming." And so the first mystery was delivered to me. I don't think I paused for breath for about 5 months while I got down the story I was being told. And then, you know, things have strings on the end of them. And so you have to continue doing what you started out until you finish that particular journey. They are called Cromwell's Folly. Let's see, No Good Deed Left Undone, Lying, Cheating, and Occasionally Murder. And by the time I got done with those, I had learned the things I needed to learn to write the thriller I had started writing 10 years before then. And so No End of Bad became a reality. And then after that, I think I was done with mysteries and thrillers. At least I thought I was done with mysteries and thrillers. So the answer to your question is, how did you find your genre? Is I have not. I'm still looking for my genre home. I wrote a fantasy adventure called Blue Girl on a Night Dream Sea. And then after that, I wrote a paranormal murder mystery called Possession. And then we had this wonderful collaborative project called Thoughts and Prayers. And right now I'm working on what I can only think of as a mashup between Fargo and Miss Marple. And I have no idea how it will come out at the end, but people do die in it, if that counts.
All right, Jeffrey, same question to you. How did you start writing, and how did you find your genre?
Well, I guess like Ginny, I started, for my earliest memories. I was writing when I was 5 or 6 too, in little blue books. My parents were teachers, and they had the little exam books. I remember staying up and going to bed at night and waiting for them to think I was asleep and sneaking out of bed with a flashlight and working all night. So it's sort of one of those things. I think like all of us, and I think this is true for most of the writers I know, you kind of knew somehow early on that you're a storyteller. And even readers, I don't really even make a big distinction between writers and readers. I think we all love stories, and whichever side of that you're on, we're all kind of in the same thing. So I was writing my whole life. I always knew that's what I wanted to do. My undergraduate degree was in journalism. I became a reporter, and then I was between reporter jobs, and I had this opportunity to get a job as a private investigator. And I was waiting for this next reporter job I had in Massachusetts to be funded. So I was like, hey, what a great way to get some fodder for books, and I'd been reading like the Robert Parker Spencer series, this was back in like the 80s. And I was so excited about it. And then I got into being a private investigator, and I was surrounded by all these people who wanted to be in law enforcement. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And one thing sort of led to another. While I knew I was a writer, I ended up working as a deputy sheriff in Florida. And then I became a federal agent. And it turned into 25 years in law enforcement, which was sort of a big left turn, when I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I always knew I'd get back to it. So I took notes and I did some writing. And unfortunately, because of my security clearance, anything I wrote during that time period had to get vetted, and it was a pain. So I really didn't write. And then I retired in 2017. And I started writing full time then. And so I had to go back and learn the craft, because my training was as a reporter in writing fiction. And, I wrote, so my first book was creative nonfiction. And even that is so very different. So I've been, I studied the craft to this day. I probably read a book on craft every month, and, and work myself to understand both the business and the actual craft of writing. The genre, after 25 years in law enforcement, especially doing a lot of work going after narco terrorists and transnational criminal groups, thrillers kind of make sense, right? I'm sort of writing the stuff that I did, but I also, that's what I liked, like I grew up reading like the Robert Ludlum and Tom Clancy, and I like those kinds of exciting, books that had like bigger stories behind them, and international spy thrillers and things. So I think when you're a writer, it's really important to do what you like to read. Like, I gotta tell you, if I could write romance, I'd be thrilled. Like the romance readers, they read 5-6 books a week. They're rabid readers, and I would love to be able to do that, but I can't. Even if I wanted to, I can't, and I'm certainly not excited about it. So I write the kind of stuff that I want to read. And like Ginny, I know it's thrillers and it's mystery thriller, right? They're so close in so many ways, but each book I've written has been a different subgenre of thriller. So I started with a creative nonfiction, like a memoir about the first narco terrorism case, but it reads like a thriller. And then I did a case about a woman on a boat who has to fight for her life when her cruise goes horribly wrong. It's a real pure thriller. And then it was a crime thriller about vigilante justice and a real underlying terrorist conspiracy, and on and on and on. I think I've got 7 books. They're all in a slightly different genre, and all of them have multiple subgenres that are a part of it. So I'm in the place where I like to read, and I'm writing stuff that I love, which is, how could you ask for a better life than that?
You've had quite the career. And I think most people wish their career was your retirement, writing. So you have a whole nother career after your career.
It's exciting. You only live once. You got to do what you love. And nothing, for people who love to tell stories, there's just nothing better than spending your day creating stories out of whole cloth. It's fantastic.
Absolutely. Solveig, how did you start writing and how did you find your genre?
Well, I can't compete with these guys because I did not start writing until I was 9. And I remember being in bed and sick, feverish, and writing on a yellow pad. And it was a very hackneyed story, the one about someone jumping out of a window, committing suicide, and landing on someone else and feeling terrible for the rest of his life. And my mother laughed at that story, and I took that as a compliment. So after that, I was always thinking of writing. My father wanted me to be a doctor. I was flattered that he would think that I could even do that. And I said, no. And then he said, well, what do you want to be? And I said, well, I would like to write plays. So that was at a threshold moment. And he said, well, in that case, I think you should probably think about getting married. Anyway, as a newlywed living on Capitol Hill, I wrote a novel, and it was called The Midwives of Drexler. Drexler was a dog, and I sent it off in the way they did in those days, in a box, and it came back in the same box. And after that, I did nonfiction. I worked for 2 different small newspapers, Roll Call, and later in Alexandria, the Gazette Packet. And so I just really did a lot of nonfiction, lots and lots of nonfiction. But every time I visited my parents in Iceland, I was researching things. I was always researching World War II in Iceland, whatever was going on in Iceland. I was always reading these Icelandic historians. And I was I was kind of, coming home to the US and typing these up in English and thinking, oh, this is great nonfiction. But that was not to be. And so I started taking classes at the Writer Center in Bethesda, short story classes. And they were always about soldiers and the occupation of Iceland and things like that. My excellent teacher, Robbie Murphy, a Welsh writer, said, this story is just too big for a short story. It's bursting the themes. Turn it into a novel. And obediently, I did. And like 27 years later, I published that story as Sigga of Reykjavik, that novel. So in other words, I was led to historical fiction because I loved the history. And I just needed a character to carry that history and interact with that history. So that's how I started doing historical fiction. I'm no longer doing historical fiction, but that I'm going to stop right there.
Okay, so I want to take a moment to remind our audience that you're welcome to ask questions in the chat box or Q&A box, and I'll sprinkle them in as they fit with what we have planned. So for this question, we're going to go in reverse order. I don't want to put poor Ginny on first every single time. So Solveig, we're going to start with you. What does your writing process look like? Do you think your process speaks more to you as a writer or to the genre that you write within? And for those of you who write in more than one genre, do you change your process depending on what you're writing?
Yeah, so for historical fiction, clearly you need a lot of research, and that's what I did. I mean, I just researched endlessly and tried to create characters that could carry the history of the period, like World War II in Iceland and that kind of thing. And my writers group absolutely hated it. They said, you are lecturing to us. This is just too much. And so gradually, I started focusing on the characters. But with historical fiction, the history is always there. So that is a big part of the process, is being knowing that history. Then you need characters who can interact in a meaningful way with the historic events without being defeated by historical situations. Now I am writing just in the broad term of literary fiction, and the story I'm currently working on takes place at the current time, sort of around here, so to speak, nearby. So the to me, what changes with pure literary fiction that is not dominated by history is the drama definitely starts from within the character. It's not, you're not dealing with a battle or something like that. You're dealing with the character's wants, needs, hopes, goals, fears, and the story is really driven by these unmet needs, or sometimes it's called a desire line. And that is really, that I feel sums up the process, is paying attention to the interiority of the character. And if the character wants something, can the character achieve that? Or does that, is that a conflict? Does the character have to modify his or her goals? Does the character have to work around it? But as I say, it starts from within. And I feel that is what characterizes all literary fiction, is that interiority and an awareness of the interiority of other characters who may be the source of your conflict. That's wraps that up. Your turn, Ginny, I think.
Did you want to go to Jeffrey?
I was going to go to Jeffrey, but I can go
Okay.
So Jenny, what does your process look like, and does it change depending on what genre you're writing in?
So I have always been a color outside of the lines kind of gal. And it surprised me to discover that I was more orderly when it came to writing novels. Not that I'm a plotter, God forbid, but I do like the idea of knowing where I'm going somehow, whether I know it intuitively or I have sort of shot my arrow into the future of the story and written down somewhere on a piece of yellow paper what is going to happen midway, what will happen 3/4 of the way, what the climax is. Because in mysteries and in thrillers, I'm sure Jeffrey will tell you, pacing is everything. In mysteries, I'm presenting the reader with a puzzle. And so I also have to do better than Wordle. I have to give them more clues to help them through the story so that they will feel that little ping of satisfaction as they find a clue, and then as they solve a piece of the puzzle, so they can point to, oh, that is a bad guy. I know something, he's going to do something bad. The reader of a mystery feels very good about themselves when they can do that. And so if I'm writing a mystery, I want to give them as many of those experiences as possible. But I also, like Solveig, want my characters to feel whole. And so I do think a lot about what they desire and what they need and what is stopping them from getting what they need. So in this strange thing that I'm currently writing, I discovered that all of my characters, there are 4 main ones in that book, all of them just want to be loved. It's such a sad little thing. They want such a basic thing, just to be loved. And yet they're also crazy. They can't be loved. People find them prickly or difficult or off-putting. One of them smells. So I don't know where these people came from. They were just there waiting for me to find them. And so each day, and I do write each day I sort of open the window and say, okay, what do you have for me today? Where are we going? What are we doing? And then I basically listen and try to write down as clearly as I can what I hear.
Last but not least, Jeffrey, tell us a little bit about your writing process, and does it change from genre to genre? I am especially interested in the difference between writing fiction and your creative nonfiction.
Yeah, there's a huge difference between nonfiction and fiction. You know, as Solveig knows, it's painful to me to write nonfiction because every little thing has to be true, right? And you have to research for both, but the amount of time and the stakes for the research when you're writing nonfiction it's tough. You know, it makes it difficult. So I don't enjoy the writing of nonfiction as much, but you know, it's different. They're just so very different. But you know, I write every day. My process is similar, I guess, to everybody here. I have to have that. I have to be in the story completely, you know. And so I get it. Like I have these great epiphanies in the shower, or when I'm going for a walk at noon or something. You know, when I'm in the story, I'm really in it, and it's my favorite. My favorite time is to make that first rough draft. You know, so I always start with like a high concept idea. I keep a document on my computer that has all my ideas, and you know, some of them are 2 or 3 pages roughed out, some of them are just a paragraph, but I've got like 100 and something now. I've lost count. And so whenever I'm ready for the next book, I go through that list and see, what am I excited about writing now, you know? And often I'll combine 2 ideas because one won't be enough. And then, you know, there's a spectrum between being a pantser and on the one end and an outliner on the other, and I'm way over on the other outlining side. So it's probably because I'm a little OCD. So you know, it's probably related to my personality, and maybe it's because I write thrillers too. You know, in thrillers, I don't know how anyone could just like write a thriller by the seat of their pants without throwing out like 70% of the book as they went. Like I break it down into 3 or 4 acts. And I have to know the inciting incident. You know, I have to know like each of the 15 major beats that you have in a thriller. I have to know where they land. And then as I write, I end up adding a lot or dropping other things, subplots and things. You know, like I'm writing right now, I'm about 65,000 words into a new work, and I think I've added 20 scenes to it as I've been going along. But I mean, it's a really strict outline. So I'm almost to Act 3, which is exciting. So that structure is really important for thrillers. You know, as Ginny mentioned, the pacing is everything, right? It's like you have to have cliffhangers. You got to keep people turning the page. And so to not know what the major points of it are would be really, really difficult for me. Especially like I'm doing an international thriller now, and it has one, you know, the A plot, then it has a B plot, which is getting more and more a part of the book as I write it. Except I've really started to like my B plot, but it's very complicated. So like what Solveig does with her characters, I do the same thing. I chart out, even though, you know, thrillers are more plot driven than literary fiction, but I still have like wants versus needs, you know, and what the character underlying actually wants to get that hopefully they'll get by the end or not get. You know, and I have to know what they're seeking, and I do like detailed backstories and personality, you know, and quirks, and I do that for all my characters, even the secondary characters. So I have that, and of course, once you start writing and the characters start speaking to you, you know, they change quite a bit, but it's a good place to start. So I'm a very strict outliner. Then once I just go like all in on that first rough draft, and I have to get it on paper. So it usually takes me about 6 or 7 weeks. And I'll get like a terrible first draft down. I'll get my 90,000 words or whatever, and then I will go back, and it's, you know, I do a structural edit. I'm cutting scenes and adding scenes, and I'm doing character edits for each major character. I'm going through and I'm checking for craft. And my first book, I think I went through it 70 times. I had so many different editing iterations, and now I'm a slightly better writer. Hopefully, you keep getting better as you go, right? So my last book that I finished, I think I had 6 major edits of it. But so I'm headed in the right direction, but it takes quite some time.
We have our first audience question. So Ashley would like to know, how long does it take to complete a book from when you start brainstorming to when it's published? I imagine it varies quite a bit. So let's start with Ginny. You started writing that first book around 4, and then you didn't start really digging in until you were 40. When you've really started that first book, how long did it take to get it published, or to finish writing it and then get it published? And have subsequent books changed?
So the first 2 books, as I said, were not published. Thank God. They each took about 10 years to write, but I was also, working, being a mom, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe if you weren't doing all those other things, it would take you less time, but I think it takes a while for you to figure out the geography of a novel. What do you have to, where do you go first? Where are the rest stops? How long will it take you to get 500 miles? All of those things you're learning on the first draft of your first novel. And if I could advise anyone, I would say, don't take it so seriously. At one point, I said to my nephew, if I replace every word in this entire novel, is it the same novel? And he said, well, if it tells the same story, it's the same novel. So, the writer's perspective, I think, is always different from the reader's. When the reader gets it, they think, you did this in 3 months. But for the writer, you've probably been working on that book far longer than the writing of it. Now it takes about, longer than Jeffrey, because I'm still basically a pantser. So, write 300,000 words and then go back and cut it down to 80. But maybe 7 months to write the first full draft. And then I like to give myself a fair amount of time for revision and editing and changing my mind, deepening. Solveig and I have talked about, how do you deepen a character in one sentence? Solveig had a very clever term for doing that. It had something to do with chasms or something. So I think maybe if I keep going another 10 years, I'll be able to whip one out in a year and a half from start to finish. But for now, I'm pretty comfortable with it being about a 2-year cycle.
Sounds like practice makes not perfect, but practice definitely gets things going a little faster. Would you say that's true?
Like learning to drive a car or climb a mountain.
Solveig, tell me about this chasm.
I'm not sure what Ginny's talking about. The chasm between what we were talking in group about how you suddenly deepen a character without adding more than 10 words to the manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
That very deep slice that you find the 10 words for that are meaningful.
Maybe it's more of an updating of the character, because the character is always changing. Maybe it's a deeper realization on the part of the character that deepens the character in 10 words. I'm trying to remember what I said.
Well, how long did it take you to write a book, Solveig, from the time you start to the time you publish?
27 years. That's how long it took me from the moment I started researching for Sigga of Reykjavik until it was published in 2019. It was, I just kept taking it off the shelf and putting it back, and I changed the protagonist. I rewrote it many, many times. I started writing it as nonfiction. And so, and then I put it on the shelf and wrote Seal Woman instead to take a break. And that was in 2001. I wrote Seal Woman, the first draft for Seal Woman at a 10-day conference at Sewanee. And I knew exactly what I wanted to do with that book in those 10 days. So that really was, I was having such a hard time pushing Sigga at that conference that I pulled myself out of it and just started writing this other thing. And that was then presented at 2003 at a conference, and it was published in 2008. So that's 7 years right there. So I'd like to be like Isabel Allende, and there's a certain day in January when she sits down at her desk, and it takes her about, I don't know, a year. She produces something every year. But that's not me. As I say, like Ginny, other things are going on, although I tend to write every day. there are always other things like teaching and having kids and this and that, but it's always in my mind. The writing is always in my mind. So
How about you?
I did want to say one other thing, though. I want to add to what Jeffrey was saying about the outline, the need for an outline and structuring. So I do that. I've started doing that too. And the deeper I get into the book that I'm currently writing, the more outline I need, in the sense that I need to know at the end of every scene what the characters know, what they know about each other, because the tendency is to forget as you move to, several scenes later. You can't remember whether you've introduced this already. So it just has to be, it's this constant updating of where we are in the story. And I do that on a big piece of paper. In fact, I just bought a sketch pad, one of these huge things for painting, and to plot it. Although I know what the story is, but it's those details that need to be. It's a matter of keeping track. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Jeffrey? How long does it take you to write a book?
Before I answer that, let me just say, look, what Solveig taking that amount of time with these books, that's what writers have to do, right? I know so many people who have started things and stopped, and that's what you have to do. It's about persistence. There isn't a single writer alive who's published a book that wasn't persistent, So I mean, I really admire that. That takes a lot of stamina and courage, and look how well it turned out. So good for you. By the way, I'd also like to pitch Scrivener to you, Solveig, instead it's a more modern version where you can tag your scenes and move scenes around and color code and do all these things that a OCD person like me absolutely loves to do. But it's a way where you can put tags for characters, and you can have notes attached, and like everything you want to do, you can do in Scrivener. So if you ever want to take a look at that, I'd be happy to walk you through it online sometime.
No, I use magic markers. I do drawing also at the same time. Nice. I'm just not very oriented to being technical.
That's interesting too, right? So everything works for everybody differly. So it's whatever works.
But it's the same. Same idea.
One of the friends in my critique group writes by hand, and I'd probably jump out a window if I had to do that, but it works for him, and he's a great writer. So I get it. To answer your question, it takes me. I write pretty fast, and I always have multiple projects going on. So I've been doing this full time for this month. It'll be 7 years, and I have 7 books. So, so it's been about a year, but one of those was nonfiction, which took a tremendous amount of time. And, I was working off a proposal too. So, on top of all the business and everything, generally it takes me about 2 weeks to a month to outline, like deeply outline a book. I've been thinking about it a little before, like when I'm finishing one project and moving to the other, I look at my list, I have an idea what, because you have to know what you're excited about. I've like had a plan to write a book. And then when it came time to write it, I'm like, you know what, I don't have that fire. And I've just immediately switched and outlined something in a few days and changed course. And then I write the first draft in about 6 weeks. And then, I'll usually put it aside for a week or something and work, and then come back to it, because just giving a little space helps. And then I do all those edits I talked about. Then while I'm doing that, I usually send the first few chapters to my critique group, and they give me like the opening, which is so important for a book, right? You got to keep people turning pages right from the beginning. And then I send one, then I incorporate all the edits, and I send it out to beta readers, and then my beta readers look at it. So I'm doing other things at that point. So, start to finish, probably 4 months, 5 months, including all the editing and stuff, but it gets a little muddled towards the end. But, and then I think the question was too, is it, to publication? And that's a whole different thing, right? Because if you're including there, like looking for an agent, I mean, I've had 2 agents now, and just finding an agent takes forever. And then, then your agent has to put things out. And especially in this COVID age, from the time they start submitting, I mean, you can get lucky and get somebody to pick it up right away, but it can take a year or more, right, to land a contract. And then once you land with the publisher in traditional publishing, my publisher, the last one I think was 9 months. but generally it's a year to a year and a half, sometimes 2 years. So I think a good rule of thumb is once you sign with the publisher, it's 1 to 2 years before it's actually on bookshelves. So it's the whole process is several years. It takes a long time. I had a guy the other day comment on I do these Facebook ads, and he commented on it. Oh, I'm waiting for the sequel to this. Like, I'm still waiting for the sequel to this. It's like, it takes time. We're not just banging these things out.
It sounds like, to the aspiring writers in our audience, there's no wrong answer to this question. On the one extreme, you have Jeffrey over here banging out a novel in 4 months, a draft in 6 weeks. I can't believe it. And on the other end of the spectrum, you've got 27 years from Solveig, and both are producing really unique novels. So I think the real takeaway from that answer is don't get discouraged, no matter how long it takes you. So let me start with Ginny for this next question. Can you talk a little bit about what makes your genre or genres unique? Are there elements to a mystery that you have to have for it to be a mystery? Or when you were writing that fantasy novel or that paranormal novel, were there things that you just had to include for it to be that fantasy or paranormal novel?
There actually are rules about genre writing. You can Google the list for each kind of genre. The only kind of book that doesn't have rules is literary fiction, where Solveig's out there on her own, floating around in the ocean, trying to scoop up words. Certainly for mysteries, you need somebody to die, pretty much. The information that I Googled at 3 a.m. started with find the body. And that was emblazoned in my mind. Oh, I have to start off with a dead body. So for me, then I work backwards. If I have this dead body, who is it? What did they do that was so horrible that somebody had to kill them for it? Who was it who killed them? This is me thinking. None of this is written down. Who killed them and why? So in my first mystery, I had to make this poor victim very, very bad, because otherwise I couldn't kill him. He was my first murder. And I just couldn't knock him off without him being very, very bad and deserving it. And even after I made him as bad as I thought he could be, my husband said, "Do you really think this is bad enough for somebody to kill him about?" And I knew he wasn't my reader. And I had to have 4 killers, because I couldn't just have one person kill him. I needed 4 people to support me in this act. So that made the book fairly complicated, and it meant there were a lot of clues and a lot of movement through the book, which turned out to be the right thing. Even though I was a novice, I was doing it correctly. So you want to basically drop your clues at certain points throughout the story. You want to build, using all the character development tools, you want to build up a rationale, the motivation for your killer. So you have to have reasons to kill people, unless you're a psychopath, but still that's a reason. You want to have small epiphanies scattered throughout a mystery novel, as I said before, so that the reader feels that they're getting it. They're in there with you. And for me, I like to write in a way that the reader knows a little bit more than the character. So the reader is saying, "No, don't do that. Don't go there. That is wrong. Step back." I like that kind of emotional pull on the reader, and I do it if I can get away with it. And I think, there's probably a strict rule about what percentage of the book has to contain your climax, which would be the moment when the sleuth, whether it's a policeman or a little old lady who knits, discovers what is really going on, solves the problem, and then slowly reveals it to everybody else who's just too stupid to have gotten it before, which usually includes the police if it's Miss Marple, or depending on who your detective is. So yes, there are definitely rules for mystery, but I think the most important thing is to recognize what I heard in a webinar, that mysteries are an intellectual exercise. It's like a crossword puzzle. You are engaging the reader in solving this puzzle. And so you want to give them clues that intrigue them. And that might be the hardest thing. What is the clue and where do you put it so that it leads them to turn the page and to go searching for the answer to the next question? And for me, that is the intriguing part about writing a mystery.
I'm sure it can be quite the balancing act, trying to both leave breadcrumbs that could let a reader reasonably figure out the mystery while making it hard enough to have it be a surprising reveal at the climax. That seems stressful to me. Do you find that to be a intimidating challenge or an invigorating one?
Now, I think of writing as invigorating. The only time it's intimidating is if it's not working. If whatever it is that I'm trying to do on the page just is like going completely awry, and I can't figure out why that's happening. I have friends who say, well, then you're writing the wrong thing. But I'm not writing the wrong thing. I'm writing the right thing the wrong way. And that is tricky to learn.
Well, Solveig, Ginny says you're out in your boat in the ocean, just scooping up words. So let's talk about literary fiction. Are there rules to the genre or elements that make it?
I think, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There are rules. And the rules I have adapted, I have from storytelling. And, and I'm going to cite Elizabeth Ellis, who's a wonderful storyteller, and I took a workshop recently with her where she does, a lot of plotting on a storyboard and that kind of thing. But her emphasis is that in every scene, an action must occur. So otherwise, if there's not an action in that scene, you discard it. So in other words, it's one story after another. Each scene is almost a story. And what I want to stress here is that there are often not big actions. Yes, you could have a murder here and there in literary fiction, but it's not required. And in fact, the actions can be very, very subtle in literary fiction. For example, what happens in a conversation can be an action. Huge change can occur in a conversation. A discovery or a change of heart. These can be actions. Something that causes things to go differently or take a different turn from where they seemed to be going can be an action. So I think it's important to remember it's not exactly what happens, although that is important to that inner desire of the character, what happens, but what happens may be less important than how what happens impacts the character and possibly causes the character to change. So that's kind of a little formula that I have for that. And so I'm just very close to storytelling in my view of literary fiction. I like every chapter, at least, or every scene to give me a semblance of a story with some action and some change. By the way, Hannah, there's some great questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, I fully plan to get to Bonnie's question next and finish this out with Ashley's. So don't worry, I'm aware and I will ask them. And this is a great reminder for our audience. Put your questions in the Q&A box. I will sprinkle them in as they fit with what we're talking about. So Jeffrey, let's go to you. What makes a thriller a thriller? Do you have how many murders do you have to do compared to Ginny?
You actually, for a thriller, you don't even need to have a murder, right? So like in the mysteries, you have to, it's almost always a crime, and the crime happens at the beginning, then it's solving the crime as you go along. And mysteries can be a subgenre of thriller, like a mystery thriller. I've written one of those, but there are differences. Like a thriller could be about, you know, an asteroid hurtling towards Earth, or a tidal wave, or a shipwreck, or like it could be about any kind of like high stakes life and death thing. I mean, there's certainly tropes, right? For all of these genres, there are tropes in there, and it's really about reader expectations. So if you're picking up a thriller, there's certain things that have to be in there, you know, and in general, it's like a high concept, you know. So you think about like a Michael Crichton or something, you know, a Jurassic Park, you know, it's like it's a big idea that you can simply tell somebody in a sentence and they get it. As opposed to like other genre fiction, I think it has to be generally a bigger idea, like about with higher stakes, maybe more international. You know, it can be smaller and about just one or two people, but generally, you know, it's involving, you know, foreign spy services, or it's involving, you know, the end of humankind as a whole. Like there's generally something a little bigger that's going on in it. The structures are kind of the same, you know, like there's basic story structure that we all adhere to. And, you know, what Solveig was talking about with a change in value in each scene, you know, I've heard people say that if a scene doesn't either move your character or the plot forward, dump it, you know, because it's not really giving you what you want. That's sort of true for everybody. But for thrillers, I think they follow more like the Joseph Campbell, you know, the hero's journey, the kind of mythological storytelling where there's, you know, you show the hero in the normal world, and then there's this call to action, and then he spends, you know, all of Act 2 fighting to get whatever it is, and about halfway through, if things are going really well, they start going really poorly, you know, then you have your moment of your darkest night, and then there's some kind of renewed plan, and and you move into Act 3, you know, and there's always a twist. So there's really like 15 beats that are kind of common to all thrillers. But the key to it is the high concept, and like as opposed to a mystery where you have a crime and then you're solving it, a lot of times the reader of a thriller is ahead of what the protagonist in the thriller knows. So I'm trying to remember, there's a great analogy for it. Can't remember. Basically, it's like a bomb goes off in a restaurant. You know, the mystery is who did it and try to find them. In a thriller, you might see the bomb under the table and just be waiting. Will the protagonist stop it in time? So a lot of times a thriller is not about solving a crime, it's about preventing one. Or it's about solving something small, but preventing something much bigger at the end. That's something you see a lot in thrillers. You know, so in thrillers, it has to be super fast paced. You know, so a thriller, more than anything, it has the word thrill in it. So if you're not delivering that, you know, you might have to pull back and say, oh, maybe I'm writing an action adventure, or maybe, you know, maybe I'm writing one of these other subgenres. But it must be thrilling. So you have to have cliffhangers. You have to pull everybody in with the beginning of each chapter, and then keep those pages turning. And there has to be like accelerating stakes as it goes along, which is common for a lot of fiction, but especially in thrillers. Things have to just keep getting worse and worse, or more, you know, more dangerous and more dangerous as you go. And for some of the subgenres, like I'm writing an international thriller now, it's really complicated. Like every character has their own thing going on, you know. So I think I have four plots that are going on, the A plot and these 3 other plots, but there's also internal stuff that's going on with each character. So, you know, people expect that if it's like an international thriller, you want a lot of different things going on, which is why you generally have multiple POVs. You know, it's very common to have at least 3 POVs in a thriller. And there's probably a lot more, but that's the gist of it. You know, how you have to make it a little more exciting and maybe a little less cerebral, but it can be both, right? This is a spectrum. And, you know, we have books that they're thrillers that are also literary. You know, there are authors who are very literary who write thrillers too. So, you know, it's just kind of where does it fall the most into?
I saw a Dean Koontz quote today in which he said, you know, it's not just about thrillers or mysteries. He wants the reader to feel all of the emotions. And so he works to create scenes in which each human emotion can be evoked in the reader. And if he does that, then he feels successful. And I think we're all trying to do that as well.
Mm.
Yeah, it's all about the emotion, right? I actually had that written on my computer for a while, because in each scene, you're trying to give the reader some kind of emotion. And if they don't have it, and if the character's not memorable, you know, if there's not something there, if they're not feeling anything, why would they keep reading? And I always remind myself of that.
I like the idea of Jenny, you painted this picture of Solveig out in this boat capturing words. And I like this idea of a thriller writer still being out in this boat capturing words, but he knows that a whale is about to come by. This marriage of thriller and literary fiction, I really like that. So I'd like to ask another audience question. We're going to start with Jeffrey for this one. Bonnie writes, what has been your obsession with each book you've written?
You know, obsession is a great word for that, Bonnie, because, you know, but I'm obsessed with writing. So I love reading books. Like I always have a book going. I read at least a book a week. You know, I love watching like series on Netflix. So I'm obsessed about the whole storytelling thing. But each book, and this is why I've kind of bounced around in subgenres, because each one has something kind of unique. So Furious, Sailing into Terror was the first one I had published. Is this woman on a boat, and I love to sail. So it's a lot about sailing. It's sailing across the Indian Ocean. You know, so a little bit of the obsession is that it's like a feeling like you're on the boat all the time. And then the next one was about a real underlying terrorist conspiracy. So there was a lot about that real conspiracy that's going on. It's crime fiction. It's written slightly differently. You know, a book that my agent has now, she has a small town murder mystery, which took place in my hometown. In Massachusetts, a little New England town, which I absolutely love. Which can be like the most beautiful place on earth or the creepiest. Sometimes both at the same time. And so like a lot of it was, you know, understanding what the themes that I had going in the book, as well as the town itself, and making sure I got that stuff right. And then the book after that, I was writing about artificial intelligence. So it's a techno thriller, and people who are looking for techno thrillers actually want a lot of details. They want the technical details. Like think of like a Tom Clancy, you know, he's writing about submarines. And if you're not into that, it's something that would just drive you crazy. But for the readers of those books, you have to have enough of that in there to make them happy. So, you know, I was all into the AI for a while and talking to people who are in the field. And, you know, so every single book, like the book I'm writing now is about the Havana syndrome. So guess what I've been immersed in for the last few weeks. You know, so that's it. And it really just, the whole process is so much fun. And I write all my books for my wife, you know, and so like when I write them, I picture how she's going to react when I'm writing these scenes. And so I always get excited when I can finally deliver a book to her, and she can point out all the problems in it for me before anybody else sees it.
I have to ask you, what is your opinion? What is your theory about Havana syndrome?
You're gonna have to read my book.
So in the chat box, you'll find a link to everyone's website. If you're interested in finding out Jeffrey's theory about Havana syndrome, make sure that you visit his website and keep an eye out for that next book. Solveig, when you're writing your books, what has been your obsession with each one?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, Bonnie. My first book, the Sika of Reykjavik, I was absolutely obsessed with the what I learned about the impact of the military occupation by the Allies in a small country. My native country, Iceland, was very, very small. It was the population was 120,000, and it was occupied by 50,000 soldiers. And I had a real shift in viewpoint when I learned the really both negative and positive impact of that occupation. I wanted to show that in a story, and that haunted me. Well, that I was obsessed with that for years. The second book, Seal Woman, it's about a German woman who goes to Iceland to work on a farm after World War II, and German women were recruited to work on the farms. And the theory was that you would just go there and you would forget about the past. You would just start, like you would just it's a very American notion. You would hit the ground running and forget about everything that happened before. My whole obsession there was, how does this impact a person who's left a child behind in Germany, and the fate of that child is unknown. And so she is haunted by that the whole time. Where is that child? So that defeats that notion of just landing somewhere and just forgetting about the past. So it's really a very psychological book. I call it historical fiction, but it's really psychological. My current book, I am obsessed with this idea. I've been obsessed with this forever. And that is, why are people both fascinated by snakes and why are they at the same time absolutely repelled by them? So my protagonist is involved with snakes. And she actually exhibits both fear and interest and attraction to snakes. Those are my 3 obsessions.
I personally love snakes. So that's another one. Keep an eye out for Solveig's next book about snakes.
Oh, that's right. I have seen your snake show at the library. There was a snake show a couple of years ago.
I believe you. I believe you. Those children's librarians get some cool things going on in there with some animals. All right, Ginny, tell me about your obsessions. You're obsessed with killing people. You're obsessed with making sure enough characters in your book will join you in that murder. Tell me what else you're obsessed with.
Well, I'm glad that Solveig used the word haunted, because I think that is how I experience this process. I'm haunted by an idea or a notion. And in my paranormal murder mystery called Possession, I was haunted by the idea of how long grief hangs around and what forms it takes, and how, if it is not dealt with, it turns into something else, something malevolent, dangerous, that can harm you further than the actual initial event. And so Possession is about all of the ways someone can be possessed by grief, or by anger, or by the absence of love, or by the longing for love. And I think that each book has its own particular obsession. The one I'm writing now, I think the central obsession of it was the question to myself: could I take 4 unlikable characters and make readers care about them? Could they really want them to be okay, to succeed, to survive, by maybe even thrive? What would I have to write in there? What would I have to find in them to construct a story that moved the reader, so that instead of just saying "yeah" and walking away, they embrace these characters? And that's pretty engaging, I think, as a target task.
I think that, Ginny, that I think it was Judith Yorst who wrote a fictional personal story, a fictional biography of Jeffrey Dahmer, the cannibal, the killer. And her goal was to make people feel sympathy for him, or to understand his plight when he was short on humans that he could dine on. And it worked. It was beautifully done. I think it was in the New Yorker, that story about Jeffrey Dahmer.
I'll look for that.
Yeah. Good.
So I have a question about publishing, and one of our audience members, Ashley, has a question about marketing. And I think those two things go hand in hand pretty well. So I'm going to start with publishing. And then because Ashley mentions bookstores in her question, we're going to end with marketing. So Solveig, let's start with you for this one. You're all traditionally published authors, and I wonder how the process of getting published differs across genres. How did you find your publisher? And did you already have a completed manuscript in hand, or did you pitch an idea?
Yeah. The way I found my agent was, let's see, and that was in 2003 when I was ready with Seal Woman. And I just went to these conferences, and I forget what it was called. It was a local conference that no longer exists. And now the Washington Independent Review has its own conference that replaces that one. At any rate, it was one of those conferences where they bring in lots of agents. And I brought in a proposal and I presented a pitch, and I had a finished manuscript behind it. And I started interacting with several agents, and I ended up with one of them who was in Denver. Well, actually, I worked with several agents before going to the one in Denver. And so that's how that went. I also sold my book I sold Sigga in Iceland too. That was a huge undertaking with a very bad experience to begin with. And then ultimately got a very good publisher, but that kind of, that in itself was extremely challenging, working on the Icelandic version. I was determined to do that. I felt like I needed it to be in Icelandic, and that's both books. They both exist in Icelandic now.
What about you?
Marketing is later. We're going to talk about that later. Okay.
We'll talk about marketing next. How about you, Jenny? How did you go about finding a publisher and getting published? And did you go to a publisher with a completed manuscript in hand, or did you pitch an idea first?
So for anybody who hasn't tried this yet, I recommend that you write your entire novel, rewrite it, edit it, get it beta read, take all the feedback you get and polish it as best you can and have that in hand first. I went a fairly traditional route. I cold queried for agents, got one by an amazing stroke of luck. And it happened pretty quickly from the time I got one to the time I got a publishing contract. But I want to say that, there are tiers in this industry. And when you're starting out, you don't understand that. You think that all publishers are equal. You think that it's a contract. You have a contract, you signed it. It says they're going to distribute your book. But there are many differences between the tiers of publishers. And if you are looking for a top tier contract, you need a top tier agent, somebody who actually knows the names of the acquisition editors they're going to pitch your book to. And that's a big difference between that and an agent who's just starting out in a small shop, who doesn't have many contacts in the publishing world. And so I urge anyone who is embarking on this to research this part of the business as completely as you would any other set of facts for your book. There are many, many webinars out there. Start with reading Jane Friedman's website from page to page. She has great graphics that will describe the differences between kinds of publishing and what you can expect, both for you to do, your obligations, and what they will do for you. But the biggest difference for publishers is reach. If you get one of the big, now 4, I think, then you have global reach. It doesn't matter that on your little Amazon thing, it says, no, you have global. That's nothing. You want the publisher who is somehow going to get your books bought by Costco and every library in the country and, taught at university level. I mean, you want the whole thing. That's your top goal. And then there are tiers below that are perfectly acceptable, but you have to shoot somewhere. And I recommend that you shoot for the top to start.
Jeffrey, same question. How did you find your publisher, and did you do it with a finished manuscript in hand?
I agree with everything Ginny just said, by the way. That's all wonderful advice. So it's different for nonfiction. I had my agent pitching with a proposal. One thing so proposals are big, and there's a couple of good books out there. I'm blanking on the name right now, but there are a couple of really good books on how to write it, but it's got, comp titles and, about you and a marketing plan and a summary and of sample chapters. There's like a whole standard thing you have to put together, but that's for nonfiction. I'd warn people that if you sell it on a proposal, though, you still have to write the book. And once you're signing a contract, then you're on a deadline. So if you're writing like how-to type books, you might only, the reason to do it on the proposal is because your editor at the publishing house may want to restructure your book. And that happens a lot for those types of books. But I was writing creative nonfiction, so I was fairly limited in how much I was going to be able to restructure a book. So I ended up writing the whole manuscript anyhow. For fiction, always have that polished manuscript and have it as good as you can possibly get it. I've heard people talk about, oh, well, the agent can, fix it, or the editor at the publishing house can fix it. And the competition is so crazy. Like the percentage of people that actually get published is so small. I mean, it's a
2%.
Yeah, I mean, it's small. And so you have to have the best possible product. Like, you have to be so sick of looking at that book, you physically just don't have it in you to read it through one more time before it goes out for an agent. And I did that. The first agent I had, I was doing some cold queries. I had an unusual experience where the first thing I sent out, I had 3 major agents who were all one exclusivity, and like I was like, oh, this is so easy, right? Yeah, but that's not how the business works. That doesn't happen anymore. But anyhow, but I cold queried for my next agent, and it takes a lot of work, and you have to look at each agent. I recommend Publishers Marketplace, because you can look at within your genre, like who's selling what over the last year or the last 6 months. You can look at how many 6-figure deals they did. And that's important, because some agents will say they kind of do everything, but like Ginny was saying, they may not have the contact at that agency, so it's worthwhile looking at it. And I send it out, like a dozen at a time. And you have to, so once you locate an agent, then look at the agency, because some agencies will say if they receive a query from you, you can only query one agent, and that's a no from the whole agency. So look at the whole agency, and you might find another agent's even better, and then query them instead. Keep a nice Excel spreadsheet going, and it takes a lot of time. I don't think there's a lot of correlation between actual eventual success and what people turn down. Like there's a good book, Rotten Rejections, I think, that goes through all these classic books, like some of the biggest selling books of all time, how they were turned down by so many agents and publishers. It's very common. So and then the same thing goes if like I would take Ginny's advice, start with the big 4. Try to get an agent, because that's every now and then some of them will open up for an agent inquiries, but that's kind of rare, and that's only like one imprint, and there's 1,000 imprints within the big 4. So get an agent, try them first. If that doesn't work, then there's some really nice independent publishers, and it's a spectrum. It goes all the way down to kind of mom and pop operations to like big ones like Kensington that are as big, that are bigger than any imprint within the other big 4. So, and each one is kind of different. If the independent publisher you have though doesn't have distribution, like my wife's with an independent publisher and they use Simon & Schuster distribution, so it covers it. But if you don't have it, then you're not going to automatically be in bookstores. You're not going to automatically get out to those libraries, and that's a big deal. So that's sort of my bar now. Like I really want to have that distribution. And then after that, you look at hybrid publishers, which I would really not recommend, but it could be right for you. And that's where the author is actually paying a portion of like the publishing costs. And there can be some really good publishers that do that. And I think even like Harper has a hybrid arm, and there's some reputable publishers that do it, but there are also a lot of predators out there who make their money off the author as opposed to off the eventual sales of the book. And I've known people who've spent a lot of money to try to get something published. And so I don't necessarily recommend that. And then you have to look at independent publishing or self-publishing now too. It's hard, and I think the average it's been going down, but I think the average number of sales is something like 150, like lifetime for a self-published book. Like, it's terrible, so if you're going to do that, you have to be a marketing and promotional guru. But people have done it, and I know people personally I've talked to who've made millions of dollars by self-publishing books. So it's certainly an avenue. There's never been a better time to get a book out there if you have to, but I would start at the top and kind of work your way down.
Well, let's talk marketing. Ashley, Jeffrey, you brought up marketing, so we're going to pick on you first. Ashley writes, when do you begin marketing your book and promoting it? Do you go to bookstores to do that? I know some authors used to go to bookstores to market and sign their books. So how involved are you in the marketing?
I'm very involved in the marketing. And by the way, even if you're with, you know, a top imprint of a big four, you still are pretty involved in the marketing. If you're with a big publisher, you know, maybe you have a $20,000 or $40,000 publicity budget or something that, but if you're with a smaller publisher, you're doing everything, you know? So I'm lucky in that my publisher does things and I get notes all the time and emails, hey, we're trying this, we're doing this. I just found out yesterday that the audio book has been submitted. So they're coming out with an audio book I didn't even know we were doing. So that's fun. You know, but they do some marketing, which is really helpful. You can't start, you want to start the plan like the second you get a contract. So even if your book's 2 years out, you want to start because you need to get reviews. You know, you need to get blurbs from other authors. If it's a nonfiction book, you want to get blurbs from experts in the field. You know, you want to get into contests. You want to do as much of that as possible. And a lot of like review sites, even like setting up for like a podcast interview, some of them require at least 6 months notice. So you want to get all that out, like even if it's not a clean manuscript, if you don't have the advanced reader copy, you just have a manuscript. Sometimes you have to send that out because you want to get in front of it. But you can't actually start marketing the book beyond those things until it's available for at least pre-order. There has to be some place for someone to go. So you don't want to spend money and time and effort and then they don't know where to go because they're not going to remember. And so I've done everything. Like I've tried and I failed at 80% of it. But, you know, I literally, you know, I tried like paper magazines and radio shows and podcast, like I've tried everything. And what I found to be the most effective is any kind of like advertising that where a reader can go, oh, that looks interesting and click on it. And if they can click on it and get right to a sale page, I have pretty good response, like about 7% click through, which is pretty good, you know, and then there's a sell through rate, which is somewhat lower than that, but those are profitable, you know, numbers. So Facebook ads work, book ads work. I think I did one Goodreads giveaway, Amazon ads, but like when you're with the publisher, they do a lot of that stuff, but I do the Facebook ads, for instance, on my own, but Amazon has to go through the publisher to do those, but those can be very effective as well. You know, I've tried printing things which just weren't that effective. I've done, you know, some in-person events. Those are somewhat limited, and COVID has screwed everything up. But these, you know, online tends to work, I think, probably better, and it gives you a broader reach. But you can whoever your publisher is, work with them, figure out what they're doing, so you're not duplicating things, and then split the time and figure out what it is you can do. And even if they're doing a lot, there's always more you can do, even if it's just giving interviews or doing guest blogs or whatever. There's I mean, there's a lot of books on this, but there's so much. But just don't get taken in by the predators who are looking to take a lot of money from you with promises of blowing your book up, because that's probably not going to happen. You know, just do the things that are proven to be effective.
Speaking of click-throughs, everyone's website is the most recent thing in your chat box. So feel free to click through and see all of our panelists online. Okay, Jenny, how about you? What have you done to market your books? Are you involved with marketing your books?
Yeah, I don't think anybody gets away from this now. The first 2 books, I just hated it. I felt like I was being strained through a vegetable peeler. I mean, just really, really painful, because I'm mostly an introvert. I mean, that is one of the reasons I like to write. I can sit here and make my own world and nobody bothers me. So marketing was a great big in-your-face opportunity that I didn't quite grasp at the beginning. But I think now I've become accustomed to it. I know there are drills. So I know that for each book, there will be in person, if we can get through COVID somehow, or now Zoom. I love Zoom. I have to say, Zoom is like the introvert's little heaven, because I'm not really there. I'm only sort of there. I don't think you have to touch people, but I like Jeffrey's idea. The impulse buy is what you're wanting to attract. So that one-click opportunity, if you can find ways to create that, like with Facebook ads. I have found that Goodreads, although, you know, that there are clicks, but it doesn't seem to make a difference. But I haven't tried a giveaway, like thousands of book giveaway. And maybe that's the trick. But I think you have to sort of keep up with the changing marketplace for this stuff. There are not just people who are trying to scam you, but endless variations and changes in the technology. So you need to keep reading about that, looking for new things to do, figuring out which things worked and which things don't work at all and don't bother. So I love doing podcasts, but I'm not sure that they do anything, because on a podcast, I can't tell if anybody is listening. Right? I mean, they sound great when you play them back to yourself, but you have no way to test your audience or their interest in what you're doing and saying. So for me, I'm just going to continue learning this part. I would like the magic genie in a bottle to come and just take it away from me and make it all work, but I know that I have a role to play.
Can I just add something to what Ginny just said? On Amazon, they have categories and you can get up to 10 subcategories for your book. So I'd send them to my publisher to add. So some of those categories are smaller. And what you can do is if you do a podcast or you do some kind of marketing push, and by the way, it's better to layer them. If you're doing a Facebook, also have an Amazon, layer them so people can find you in multiple places. But you can watch your ranking in these various categories move. So if I do a big push on something, I'll see generally a huge jump for my book. So I don't know the exact sell-through rate, but I know it's there. I know it's happening.
Solveig, let's talk a little bit about marketing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, I want to tell you that I got some good advice from Bob Bausch, the late Bob Bausch, who was an instructor, and he's at the Writer Center, and he's published several pretty good novels. And he was at an event there, and I was talking to him, and he said, the best advice I can give you is once you've published your book, don't waste time marketing it. Immediately start writing your next book. He said that was the biggest mistake I made. I spent 2 years marketing, and I just produced nothing during that time. So I took that to heart. So anyway, I'm, not... there's this stuff you're supposed to do on social media, and I really admire what Jeffrey's talking about Amazon. I think that's really interesting. My philosophy is just do what's fun. So I really like to address a group. I like to if I get an opportunity to do a presentation at a bookstore, and I always tell the audience, I can do your book group. I can do it online, or I can do it in person if you're not too far away. And that often has led to all kinds of things. I have done many, many book groups, and people love that. And I advertise that on my website. My availability for book groups include book group questions at the end of the book. And so that's that for me, that's been a lot of fun, actually. I love getting the feedback from people who've read the book. And so in the course of all this, I've become an extrovert, maybe. I think by nature, I'm an introvert. So that's the book group. I think promoting your book wherever you can is a good idea. Forgetting the technical part. If the local dress shop, if they're interested in your book and they want you to sit there, around Christmas time at the door, I'm ready to do that. You sit at a little table, you sell your book. Also, thematic events. For me, it is the Icelandic bazaar, the annual Icelandic bazaar. That is a huge marketplace for my books because they are about Iceland. But if you can find something that relates to your theme, go there and offer your book. That you could find maybe a book fair or something. Just be creative and organize panels. Like this is a marketing event.
And spoiler for everyone in the audience, Solveig is the one who really prodded us into doing this, and I'm so happy she did.
Well, I saw Ginny and Jeffrey both on a mystery book panel, and I thought, well, we can do this across several genres. We did this a couple of years ago. I did this with my friend Leslie and a couple of other women on the topic of strong female protagonists. We did that in 2 different venues, one at the Writer Center and the other at East Side Books downtown. The Writer Center, if you're a member or if you're active there, they are quite amenable to having you come as a speaker. I have done that along with a poet. You know, they pair you with different people. You know, we've done a panel there on storytelling, so it can be peripheral to your particular book. But oh, by the way, I have a book. Is sort of what is on the side there. So my advice is, once you've taken care of all these technical things, and hopefully you can get somebody else to do that for you, is to have fun with it. Have as much fun with it as you can, and just, you know, get out there and meet people and talk about your book. And yeah, so that is I hope that's a human approach as opposed to professional. Making up for my lack of professional approach.
So we are running short on time, so I'm going to ask each of you one last question, and that is going to be, what advice would you give the aspiring writers in our audience? So let's go back to our original order. Ginny, you started us off on our first question. Do you want to take this one?
Sure. Be ready to walk through a blizzard for 7 miles, or the equivalent emotional furor. This is a hard journey. There are no sure ways to be successful at it. You just really have to be hard-nosed. You have to be willing to keep going no matter what, no matter how many rejections. And if you go on Twitter and follow some authors or people who are writing, you will see that periodically they post how many rejections they've racked up in the last 3 months. It's a lot. You have to be willing to go through a storm of rejection over and over and at every stage. You have to take it on the chin for your writing. You have to take it on the chin from agents and then from publishers. And then if you're lucky and got an editor, then you've got to take it on the chin again. Just have to keep going. It's the most important element of being a writer.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, that's all good stuff, Ginny. I appreciate that. People who think of themselves as aspiring writers, if you're actually writing, you're a writer. You're not aspiring, you're writing. So just keep doing that. You just can't give up. You just have to keep doing it. I would learn the craft. I mean, there's a lot to it. I mean, so much of it's internal, but you can learn a lot of things. We all made the same mistakes, right? The more you write, you get to that 1,000,000 words, and hopefully you're not making those mistakes anymore. But try to write every day, or write as many days a week as you can. Read books on craft. Listen to podcasts. I like DIY MFA is a good one. There's so many good podcasts you can get. Learn the business of writing. Ginny mentioned Jane Friedman. She actually edited my first book proposal. She's terrific. She really knows the business. She's written some good books about the business of it. But you have to understand how it works, so that when you're talking to agents and editors, you don't come off as amateurish. So it's easy to avoid a lot of things and save yourself a lot of time and heartache. I'd also get a critique group. I mean, there's some groups online. Just be careful to make sure that people are trustworthy. Get beta readers, people who read in your genre, and get I would look at the conferences. Like, I'm a member of Sisters in Crime, the International Thriller Writers. If you're a thriller, mystery, or any of those subgenres, it's a really fantastic organization. You go to the conferences, you can meet agents, you can meet publishers, you can meet other authors, and take courses on craft. So those kinds of things. Just get in it for the long haul. Understand you're a writer, and if your work's getting rejected or whatever, be open to the feedback and work on it. And maybe just don't push it out self-published right away because no one's interested in it. Maybe there's something that needs to be fixed. And just keep trying to do it the right way, and you'll get better and better the more you write. And don't sit there for 2 years either. like Solveig was suggesting. As soon as you finish one book, start on the next one. Just keep writing, because you got to get that Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours in.
So yeah, I'm functioning from the term aspiring writer. So I just finished teaching a class at the Writer Center for that was supposed to be for beginners, and it was transforming your memories to stories. And as Jeffrey just said, if you're writing, you are a writer. So some people there were talking about, oh, they have to tie themselves to the chair to write. And I encourage people to view the writing as an indulgence. You're indulging yourself, you're indulging your imagination, you're indulging your memories, you're allowing your memories to come up. And you are doing it for yourself, really. And your own life is fascinating. It's a wonderful place to start with your own memories, making sense of them. And even if you don't publish, you will have that benefit of having discovered what your life is about, was about, and what you are doing here on earth. I mean, what is meaningful and what isn't. So writing is just a wonderful way to celebrate that creativity, and that the creativity comes from you. Don't start thinking about business. Start with this celebration of creativity. Otherwise, you may never get there. And then one thing leads to another, but starting with your own personal story, the writing in the I form, that is a wonderful way to start for all aspiring authors. And your memoir may be fascinating. Your personal stories may be wonderful. So start where you are and celebrate what your creativity, your imagination, and your inspiration. Forget the rest until later, maybe.
Thank you so much, all three of you. Thank you, Ginny. Thank you, Jeffrey. And thank you, Solveig. A huge thank you to Solveig for putting this panel together and pitching it to the library. I'm so happy to host you all. My next program is going to be this Saturday on Zoom. Alexandria's poet laureate, Kaniki Jakarta, is going to teach a workshop on manuscripts and marketing. If you at all had interest in that part of today's conversation, if you have a finished manuscript, if you plan to someday have a finished manuscript, please feel free to join us on Saturday. We'd love to have you. It will be an interactive workshop, unlike this one that is a webinar. So it won't be recorded. So please, if you have any interest, try to join us on Saturday with Kaniki. All right, panelists, do you have any final words for our audience?
No, just right on what Solveig said.
Happy writing.
Keep writing. And Hannah, thank you. You did a great job.
Yeah,
Thank you,
Hannah. Wonderful.
All right, everyone, have a wonderful evening.